people from the Sunday Salon. And that name came from, I always had a deep desire to have been in Gertrude Stein's salon with all of the painters, all of the, and when they did that, I thought how spoiled those people were. I mean, they didn't have to do anything. Their parents paid for them. I said, wait a minute, who paid for me? Oh yeah, my parents sent me to school. That's right, that's right. So it became the Sunday Salon, and I didn't know where we were going. We had quotes from different writers, and we'd use that. I put a quote at the top of the study. So we looked into different writers, and we would use them with a quote that would help us with our next study, our next whatever. And I was looking around, it was Sunday Salon, October 12th, 2025. And that was our, our 4th year together for our Sunday Salon. And I didn't know, but I happened to just run into this picture. I'm always looking for things. I ran into this picture and this quote. I'm going to ask you if you know where the quote came from. It said, "We didn't realize we were making memories. We just knew we were having fun." Anybody know? No?
We know, of course.
What? Oh, yeah. You're part of us.
Yes.
Well,
Give it away.
we didn't realize we were making memories. We just knew we were having fun, and I thought, well, that's where we've been. For 4 years, we were having fun, but we were also making memories. So it really grabbed me, and I brought who it was from. Don't you wonder what's in here? Who it was from and who I got it from. Winnie the Pooh. So in my enthusiasm, I bought a Winnie the Pooh. And the other part that I recognized that we were doing is we were speaking about all of the people that we're going to speak to, all 4 of us, had a passion. That's kind of what got us together on the Sunday Salon, because I thought it was a classy name, so we were going to the salon. And then I kind of ran out of steam, and that's when we came up with Winnie the Pooh. And I realized that each person, as I said, had a passion. We all shared the fact we had a passion. And that got me going. So that meant get out your computer and look up passion. And on passion, I just made this up as I went along, but the path to any passion may well be, and I just made this up. First you find it, then you follow it, you follow your passion, and then you feed it. And that's how passions, and I had the idea that realizing that it's hunger, the passion's hunger, may end up making it nearly insatiable. So then you're on and you're on and you're on with the same passion. And I looked up passion. What does passion do for one? And it said, it reported that passion fuels your motivation, it boosts your focus, it allows you to be more creative, makes you happier, equips you with positive attitudes, and this goes to the people who were with me through the whole ride. It attracts other passionate people, and that's not bad. That's probably the most exciting one, I think. So I decided, I'd kind of argue with that one. That works pretty well. So the following people, Lila, Peter, Sue Hale, all outlined their passion. And I just think it was really, my passion is them. Is I like to be in a sort of a teaching mode or a looking up mode. And that got me going. So it made me have something to look forward to every couple of weeks. We did every other Sunday. And it was good for me, very healthy for me. So I'll leave it there, and I will introduce the people who will share their passions and tell you what their passions are, according to what I think it is. Lila, for finding, following, and feeding her love of languages and her worldwide services as a global citizen. Does that fit? Okay. You're on, Lila. And I'll just leave. I should. Winnie should not have to sit in the dark. There. Okay.
Donna, you have been a most extraordinary mentor.
Thank you, ma'am.
Can you hear me? Which good ears?
I said thank you, ma'am.
So today I brought you from my little flower pot garden. Some
Oh.
of the wonders of Chebeague, except as Caitlin immediately recognized, tulips are not yet up. He's not on the North Road. Those, I confess, came out of a bouquet that Suhail gave me. But you have kept all of our creative juices flowing.
Thank you very much.
You are a wonderful teacher, and every student who ever had you is very, very lucky.
Well, I will show you one time when I wasn't, that's how I'm gonna close.
That's what every good teacher does.
Thank you, Lila.
Donna also liberated me from my life of writing academic articles, policy papers, memoranda of understanding, negotiating UN agreements, and insisted that I find my own voice. That was not very easy for me after using all of those corporate we's, but you did it. Today I won't be sharing with you any of the original pieces of stories that Peter and Suhail and I put together. I can't believe it's been 4 years, but it is a compendium. And instead, I'm going to reflect from the angle that you have given us on how I realize what my passions are and how I pursue them. I was born in the middle of the Second World War in Princeton, New Jersey. That was my home until I went off to college. But my second home is Chebeague, Iowa. And it has always been our safe harbor and our rock. And both of those places were filled with a variety of fascinating people. And not all of them spoke English. And not all of them spoke in the idiom that I was used to speaking. You listen to Sharon Bowman's writings and realize, that's what I was hearing when I was on Chebeague as a child. It was a different idiom. It was so exciting to hear the way people talked. And I wanted to understand what they were saying. I wanted to climb over fences, walk on top of fences, look at what was going on the other side. And that variety and the freedom to do that, whether I was in Princeton or here on Chebeague, I know prepared me for the life that I have led afterwards, after I escaped from the borders even of the United States into a kind of borderless world. The languages I started with, I was lucky that in our public school, they thought really learning a language was important. So in 3rd grade, we were all studying full-time French. That was the basic. And that excited me because my best friend Nina had a French mother and a Czechoslovak father. Both her parents were refugees, and they spoke French at home. So I would always be squirreling my way into the kitchen or listening to them in the dining room to hear what was going on. And before long, our little group of 18 kids, that included Nina, were able to speak French fluently. And by the time we were in high school, we were performing in plays, we were enjoying the latest French pop music. It was a wonderful world they opened up to us. And none of us, except Nina, had ever been to France. But that had become a world that was also ours. And I wanted to go beyond that. My first memory, vague memory, as a tiny little girl, was when my great uncle, I'll call him Unky, or we called him Unky, took me down the road to visit for tea with a friend of his that I called the furry man because he wore a kalpak, an astragan hat with a lot of little lamb curls on the hat. He was the furry man. But Unky told me, don't talk. Just be quiet, because we're going to be talking with each other. I already then was recognized as talking too much. So we climbed up the stairs into the furry man's study that had wonderful windows, almost like this that looked out. But the rest of the study was piled with papers and books. And when I came in, he gave me a set of little wind-up birds. And he got down on the floor with me and showed me how to wind them up. And he left me there to play with them, while he and my Unky sat around chatting in what I learned later was German. I didn't understand a word they were saying. But by the time I was at the end of high school, I wasn't doing too badly in German. And fortunately, Unky was helping out with that. We didn't have good school. But I wanted to go beyond the European boundaries. I wanted to learn Russian. That was the era of Sputnik, you'll probably remember, in the race against Russia. But I wanted to know what the Russians were really saying to each other, what kind of music they listened to. Could I read Russian novels in Russian? And sure enough, there was an elderly tutor in Princeton, a friend of my father's, who took me on, and we went for walks, and I gradually started to learn Russian. But I also got introduced to Serbo-Croatian. Some of you know, Evan certainly does, something about that language. That's what they speak in Bosnia-Herzegovina. Very exciting. And I wanted to learn Turkish, but I heard, oh no, you've got to wait on that. That's a real toughie. But by the time I was a junior in college, I was off to learn Turkish in Turkey with Turkish students in a technical university where, unlike Princeton, girls were admitted. And they were studying engineering, and they were studying economics, and they were studying physics. And everybody thought that's exactly what they should be doing. It was like a national duty. I thought, where have I been all this time? But I got help switching gears because I got to be part of their going out to do field work. Field work in villages, that was considered another national duty. Conducting surveys, something I was taking statistics and learning how to prepare statistical reports and asking all sorts of questions and being able to talk with women and listen to them about things that people thought were very private, like what was their sex life like. I got quite an education in that early on. Those languages opened up multiple doors for me, and so did those new skills that I was learning. And I'm very, very grateful to all of the teachers along the way, which include Donna now, where, as she says, this is all only prologue. What I was having the pleasure of was the prologue of it comes from interacting with remarkable people. But the time that I was born, you will recall, most of you, was during the war itself, 1943. My father was in Europe. I didn't see him or remember seeing him until after the war was over. He was with the OSS, the American espionage and sabotage operation was set up by Wild Bill Donovan. And I was back with my mother, living with her uncle, my great uncle Unky, and his sister, Naney. And it was a wonderful life I was having in their house, with fascinating people that came in and out. Somehow, my father managed in 1944 to find a way to get us by plane, I don't know how he did it, from Princeton to Chebeague, with probably some other forms of transport in between. He wanted to introduce this 1-year-old, or not quite 1-year-old of his, to his grandmother. And on Chebeague, my great-grandmother lived in the house. In fact, she built that house that Evan lives in now. It was more exciting then. It had a 3-holer. The 3-holer is still there, by the way, in other uses. We thought that was the most interesting place to go to. It had a little seat for the tiny ones with a cover that didn't fit very well, and 2 adult ones next to it, and a little Persian rug on the floor. Very elegant. And a screen outside that was covered with bittersweet for decoration. My brother says that's probably the original load on Chebeague. Maybe they got it from Little Chebeague to start it off. This world was filled with remarkable people. My great-grandmother sincerely believed that she could write notes to the mice. And she did that. That's how she managed not to have mice in her cornmeal. I remember after she'd written a note, Mr. Mouse, the cornmeal is much better down at Josh's house. Or she would write, the cornmeal is much better down at Eli's house. And when Josh or Eli would come by to visit and complain about the mice in the cornmeal, she would just smile smugly. She knew why they were there. This was a world full of remarkable people who took me clamming with them, took me out shopping, and we only did that walking, by the way, or with the radio flyer, or out in the woods to chop wood. That was an education that prepared me for where I was going to be going next, and I was absolutely determined to get out beyond Halfway Rock. I'd look out there. I knew my father would kid me about it. He said, that is not England on the other side. That goes straight to the Azores. And any mariner on Chebeague knows that, so you better remember that one. And I wanted to get on the other side. It wasn't until I was working for foundations, universities, and then later the UN, that I had the privilege of always flying into New York, down over Casco Bay. That's how I got out beyond Halfway Rock. My best friend in childhood, Nina Kriz, recently wrote to me and she said, Lila, no one would believe the adventures we have. We are old ladies and look at us, what we've experienced. She said, we used to walk along those walls and climb under walls. And remember the UNICEF trick-or-treat boxes? How exciting that was. And remember Danny Kaye and how he'd sing Thumbelina? And then we got to go, when we were older, to the UN in New York. Imagine, we never thought that you would become the director in UNICEF of all of its global operations, its planning and coordination, or that I would be in Geneva managing all the UN archives and libraries. What do you think did it? Well, she said, I think those bike hikes we were able to take all on our own were a big part of it. And then we started to list other things, like my sister and I being able to play on the boys' soccer team just because our coach wanted to beat the private school team and he needed some good players. The period was not all rosy. You remember that in 1945, the United Nations was founded in San Francisco. because the war had wreaked such devastation that the nations of the world who couldn't agree at the end of World War I finally decided that we have to give up a little bit of our national sovereignty in order to see that people communicate with each other, do not invade each other, and that we have a world that respects everyone regardless of race, religion, sex, to ethnicity. And only 2 months after that, the United States bombed Pearl Harbor. Hiroshima, Nagasaki. That furry man that I went to visit, I later learned when I was in grade school, was Albert Einstein. He was just a neighbor across the street. He was the person who wrote to FDR in 1939, afraid that the Nazis would be able to have the atomic bomb before the United States did. And from that, the Manhattan Project was born. We did it, and now we're living with it. Here we are on Chebeague on this amazing summer, spring, I don't know what we call it, but it is all life bursting forth here. Exceptional. Producing these flowers, protecting this tiny, special piece of earth. And I think all of you who've seen Artemis II in flight as it was coming, the team was coming back, were saying, look at that wonderful place we call home. That planet that is green and blue and is surrounded by black. That's how it looks, and you've seen it coming from outer space. And there in those images, there are no borders, there are no walls to climb over. It's one unified globe. And I feel very, very fortunate to have lived a good part of my life as a citizen of that planet and able to communicate and hear people sorting out differences. And I'm very hopeful, as with the flowers that come back in spring, that we will find a way forward together. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Peter's little intro here is, Peter, for finding, following, and feeding his passion for the law and justice in order to help families and their children. And this is a success story, and I beat him up saying, make it a success story, because we need, when we're talking to people about finding their passions, encourage that. It's a good, healthy thing to do. And you contributed, and you're on.
If anybody doesn't know me, my name is Peter Rice. I'm a lawyer, and I live here on Chebeague, or I was a lawyer. I guess I still am. Feed your passion. Another way of saying that is follow your bliss, which is a phrase closely associated with Joseph Campbell. And to me, that, or to him and to me, that meant doing what it is you love to do, doing what it is you feel is your mission in life, doing what it is that makes you happy. And that's what I did. I wanted to become a lawyer, and I did become a lawyer. To me, practicing law was a noble endeavor, like King Arthur and his noble knights, jousting for justice and fairness. And there seemed to be something very, to me, growing up, very American about law and practice in courtrooms. Everybody was entitled to a defense. Everybody was entitled to their day in court. So many of our American heroes were lawyers. Clarence Darrow, Thurgood Marshall, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, Atticus Finch, before he knew he became a racist. And I grew up in the 60s, civil rights movement, the anti-war movement, I wanted to participate in that. I wanted to do that. Law was a big part of that, and I was going to do that. I was going to change the world, challenge the world, move mountains. However, I didn't go to law school till I was 34. By that time, the civil rights movement had abated a bit. The war in Vietnam was over, so I was going to do environmental law. As it has turned out, I have not done one day of environmental law. Following law school, my wife and I and my son, we moved to Alaska. I was a law clerk to a Superior Court judge, which to me was really fascinating. I mean, I got to learn how the courts work, how do you put together a trial, what is really involved. And then we moved back to Maine, and I couldn't find a job as an environmental lawyer. So I started doing criminal defense, which I never thought I would do, which I never thought I would like. But it's a way to make money. And I discovered I liked it, I was good at it, and I had good judgment, good instincts. I picked juries, I did trials, I represented people. I even got a not guilty verdict, which is pretty unusual. And people would ask me, how can you represent somebody that you think is guilty or that you know is guilty? To me, that was easy. I always gave the same answer. That I was part of the American system of justice, and that everybody was entitled to a defense. And that the really hard thing was to represent someone you believed was innocent, because everybody else in the criminal justice system, judge, prosecutor, probation officer, they all assumed that the person was guilty. And so that was very difficult. And then after a few years of doing criminal defense, I ended up working for Disability Rights Maine. Let me say, in terms of representing unpopular causes and unpopular people, that's something that is ingrained in the American justice system or the American legal system. I mean, we are in law school really encouraged to do things like that, to represent unpopular causes, like the ACLU representing Nazis the neo-Nazis when they want to parade in Skokie, Illinois. I mean, John Adams, before he became a founding father, he represented Boston soldiers, British soldiers, redcoats, who were accused of murder, accused of killing people at the Boston Massacre. So there's a real ethic, I think, in American law and American justice to not just accept what you see. So anyways, I went to work at DRM, Disability Rights Maine. I started out doing special education, representing children with disabilities who are entitled to a free and appropriate public education, and we're not getting that always. Then I became legal director, and I got to do class actions. I helped create the children's mental health system here in Maine. I represented individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities get the services to which they were entitled. I helped people who had disabilities who were living at home continue to live at home. They didn't have to be institutionalized. And I represented children who had severe disabilities but weren't allowed to leave their homes except in certain circumstances. But I helped them to be able to access the community so they could go with their family, get an ice cream, go watch a baseball game, picnic, go to the beach, whatever. Participate in the family life outside of the home. The last part of what I did was I represented individuals who were deaf. And that really was an eye-opener. People who are deaf are so isolated. They cannot hear. It's a silent world. they could not participate in the conversation we're having here today unless there was an American Sign Language interpreter. And many of you know that about the Governor Baxter School for the Deaf over in Falmouth. Children there, like other children across the country and in Canada, were subject to incredible abuse there. Physical, sexual, and emotional abuse. They would run away, police would bring them back. They would tell their parents didn't believe them. And they were alone. They were captured by their tormentors. By the time the state did get around to investigating, the statute of limitations had passed and no one could be criminally prosecuted. So what the state did was it created a funding system so that former students could access counseling services, which was the least the state could do at that point. And then later on, they decided to cut the budget, you know. What are we spending this money for? And so we worked very hard to make sure that they did not cut the budget and that people who were former students were entitled to counseling services. And that's what I did at the end of my career at Disability Rights Maine. I'm still practicing law to a much more limited extent. I'm doing juvenile defense, representing people who are under guardianship, who want to terminate that guardianship. And a couple things I learned, one thing that I really learned that this Donna, Suhail, and Lila really helped with was writing. I mean, I always wanted to be a writer too, but I had nothing to say. But being a lawyer, I was a professional writer. I would write on demand. I would write what I was told, the memos that Lila was talking about. Working with them, working with the Sunday Salon, my writing improved. It got much better, even though it wasn't the same kind of writing, but it was communication. As Donna would say, show it, don't tell me, show me. And so that's what I tried to do. And I just have to say that I was incredibly lucky to do what I did. It was a gift for me to be able to represent the people I represented, to change the world, to do those things that I always wanted to do. Yes. And, I didn't think I would ever do that. I mean, when you're, 16, 17 years old, you want to change the world. But I didn't think I would ever really get a chance to do that. But I did. And I'm just so incredibly thankful for that. So, thank you.
And
thank
so
you.
are the kids and the families that you
Yes.
helped.
Yeah.
Those are the stories that need to be told.
And they're still going on.
Yes.
I don't do much of it, but it's still
Right.
going on. But
Yeah.
thank you to Donna, Lila, Suhail, Pooh Bear.
Thank you, Peter.
That was my passion.
Thank you. Suhail, and for finding, following, and feeding his passion for art and museums and sharing them with his 2 home communities. You have 2 home communities, don't you? Yeah.
Lovely. I will be brief, but I will take my time, as Phil Jordan would say. It's been 4 years since the Sunday Salon started, and when I began, I wasn't sure what I was doing, but I realized that there was something of a story. We were having fun, but there were memories being built. I was born in Amman, Jordan, and at the age of 6, after the 1948, my father decided to go to Egypt And growing up in Cairo and going to an English boarding school, co-education, highly disciplined, run like Eton and Harrow in England, headmasters, houses, girls, Saturday evening dances, and most important was making my bed every morning, which I do till to the present day, and to my Lila's delight. Well, visiting many historical sites, the Cairo Museum, going to Upper Egypt, Luxor at the age of 14, I lived with a culture and civilization that was so rich. And when the Suez War happened, and the revolution of King Farouk and the Abdel Nasser was in power, father decided to send me to England. So I left Cairo with the ammunition of a highly disciplined, multicultural. In my classes at the English school, there were students of many cultures, Greeks, Italian, not only British, Jewish, Egyptian, Syrians. We were multicultural, living, playing, studying, playing sports. We all lived together and grew up in a multicultural British but an Egyptian environment. So England was preparing me for another adventure, to go to study and get a college degree, university. I discovered geology by accident for my A-levels, and I loved the subject so much that I graduated from London University as a geologist. And I landed up with a position with BP of Aberdeen, working as a geologist in the North Sea. And that after 3 months, I found it so complicated, taking me from Aberdeen on a helicopter and dropping me in the middle of the North Sea, storms and drilling. I thought it was not the type of job I wanted to continue. So I came back and to London, and finally I was lucky in finding a job with Kingston College of Technology in the geology department. And I was so happy helping students and research students with their geological studies. See, geology is so fascinating. It opened so many doors for me because I did so many trips across the British Isles, from Scotland to Wales to Southeast England. And during these visits and visiting outcrops and picking rocks and digging with my hammer, I always had the fascination to see stately homes and castles of Britain. I always made a point of visiting, from Blenheim Castle to Windsor to Sheffield to Edinburgh. I mean, you name them. That was a fascination. And I don't know whether the passion was there guiding me. I was rediscovering myself, but that was what I was doing. Always feeding into these stately homes and monuments. When a friend of my father called me for lunch, he said, "Sohail, you've overstayed in England. What are you doing? Many companies in the Middle East require geologists like you. You should go back and work there." And he was very influential in the Middle East, in the Arab world. He was a consultant and advisor to Bourguiba of Tunis. He was a professor at AUB and Oxford University. He was flying to New York. He said, "These are two names I want you to write to: the Libyan National Oil and to Aramco," his personal people. So I wrote, and finally an acceptance came from the Arabian American Oil Company, which was so attractive, so exciting, I wasn't really interested in going, but I decided for the money's sake to leave what I was in the comfort zone of London to go to the Arabian sands. And I did end up working with the American Arabian Oil Company, oil in the empty quarter of Arabia on drilling rigs out in the deserts of Saudi Arabia. And this was 2 to 3 weeks at a time. You drill, you're the only one working with another 38 other people, drillers and Santa Fe and Bayreuth and Schlumberger. I mean, it was an exciting and very exhilarating work. I did well, and I worked for many years, but then the Saudi government and the Americans were restructuring the company, and I thought, well, it's time to leave. I went back to Jordan, and I ended up living with my brother and my mother, which at the beginning was fine, coming back home, family and so forth. After a year or two, it really turned out to be a disaster. So I decided to buy my own place and move out. So I got in touch with a broker. This broker looked like Inspector Maigret, very polished mustaches, his hair and so forth. He took me to a house which I liked very much, but apparently after having shown interest, it was under contract. He said, well, don't forget, I'll show you something else. We drove down to downtown Amman, and he showed me a building. He immediately took me to the roof of the building, and I saw this panoramic view of the Citadel, temples of Hercules, the Jordan Museum of Antiquities. I fell in love with the building. I had no idea what's below the building or what's inside. It was a shape of a pie, cake pie, no straight lines in the whole building, an unfinished terrace, multiple tenants, and the grocery store. My family really were so disappointed, devastated, that I wasted all my investments in this stupid building. So I decided that I would try slowly to get the tenants to vacate and pay them lease money, which they were all interested in doing. Luckily, they were all interested to leave if they had some compensation. The last person was the grocery store. It was called the Grocery of Lights. The owner was an elderly man, and one day I was standing in front of the store. Another gentleman comes in, an elderly man with a stick, very old man. He walks in and he looks around, poking. He didn't buy anything, but he kept looking. And the store is just simple with some canned food, Coca-Cola, cigarettes, gum, candies for school children. And he said, look, if you dig down there below the flour bags and the sugar bags there, you'll find 2 rooms below. And he walked out and disappeared. Nobody knew, I never knew his name, knew what he wanted, nothing whatsoever. Finally, I decided to agree with the owner of the grocery store, and he left and vacated. So I owned the whole building and got 2 Egyptian laborers. We started digging. You know, my inspiration always came back to me, that drilling for oil, not drilling for food. Who knows? So slowly, I said, slowly we'll go on without trying to figure out how this is going to shape up. some stairs started to appear. We dug more and more and more stairs came up, and finally a hole, and finally a room came in appearance. It had a lot of smells. We waited for a few days, then we continued. We found 2 rooms down below. It was unbelievable. From the 2 rooms, I managed to renovate, and I opened a gallery called Jordan Works of Art. And it was a narrow hole-in-the-wall gallery. And I was interested in David Roberts, prints, getting them from Lebanon, selling them out. And then it became a center. Artists used to come for the evenings, poetry reading, exhibitions. And one day, the ambassador of Turkey came in and said, I have a guest who's been with us for 3 months. Would you kindly have an exhibit of his works? I said, why not, Your Excellency? We'll have his exhibition. But he said, Her Royal Highness, Princess Fahrinisa Zaid, would like to patronize his exhibit because she was a very famous Turkish lady in her 80s, and her son was the Chief Chamberlain of the Royal Court. Can you imagine how extraordinary for me to have such honorary invitation to have an exhibition of this kind of level? Finally, at the opening, the princess arrives with all her students, royalties, into this hole in the wall. She was pretty, representative, heavyweight. She went down the stairs. We were following with security and the royal highnesses and princesses. And the exhibition was a great success. He sold all his works. And it picked up so much publicity that the gallery began to move forward with success. A year later, I got a telephone call. The Royal Society, the president of the Royal Society of Fine Arts, asked me to become director of the Jordan National Gallery of Fine Arts. It is something that I've never even dreamed of or expected. I never applied. There was no interview. She said, please reply within a few days and so that Her Majesty Queen Noor and the board would know. I went to my mother and she was so excited. She said, serve Jordan and serve the Arab world with my blessings. I went to see my 2 brothers. They said, don't touch it. Leave it alone. We don't work for royalty. A few days later, I accepted. The Jordan National Gallery began with an idea, not a collection. Half the collection were from Pakistan. It was in a rented room. It was challenges of building a collection of contemporary Arab art from Morocco to the Gulf. It was great honor to serve and to build. This was my great passion. I knew that suddenly I have found it. I have never dreamed of leading such an institution, and here was the chance for me to serve. And I did everything I could to build up my own skills. I went to Rome to attend ICROM, where Evan's father, Dr. Jawad Erder, was head of the ICROM, the International Council for the Conservation of Monuments. They have a special treatment for 1 month for directors to acquaint themselves with conservation, security, presentation of works. So that gave me much more skill and confidence in leading. And then I got confidence from the Ford Foundation to shut the museum for 1 week and take all my staff to Istanbul to train them and expose them to management skills, treating how to manage with paintings, with conservation works, and so forth. You see, it was a very challenging time, and I spent 14 years building up this collection, and by the time I left, we had over 80 exhibitions, international and local, and we had a great interest from the Arab world to be associated with the Jordan National Gallery. When Laila was appointed to go to New York to be head of planning and programs for UNICEF, it was such an important position that I couldn't but release myself from my duties and join her to New York. And after that, I continued studies at NYU with the Rockefeller Foundation. And finally, my mother said once, "My son, you're like a bird with wings. You never know where you will be landing." And suddenly, Laila and I flew. We landed on the east coast of Maine on Chebeague Island. And here, with all my lifelong experience and passion for art and museums, I'd like to share with you this presentation. Thank you.
Travel is exciting. It opens up our worlds. I learned that island people are natural travelers, filled with curiosity and ready to set sail. They surprised me in 1998 with their enthusiasm. Donna Damon, the president of the Chebeague Historical Society, asked me to speak about Napoleon's expedition to Egypt. Little did I know that my audience would want to go there with me as their guide. "Why not?" Wave Trainer said. "Let's make it a fundraiser for the museum. You have all your professional connections in the museum world, Suhail. Take us behind the scenes." My neighbor, Joni Robinson, said, "Count me in. I can't wait to go." This got the ball rolling. The whole island became involved in making these adventures possible. Planning, communicating, budgeting, 5-star arrangements at reasonable prices. Every traveler had become a member of the museum and contribute. The goal, to help transform the East End schoolhouse into the Museum of Chebeague History. A year later was Joni Robinson posing in front of the pyramids. "I can't believe I'm here." The Chebeague travelers bargained in the markets, tried out belly dancing, and made new friends. Museum curators took them into their archives. Researchers received them in their conservation labs. Monks at St. Catherine's Monastery took them in their precious inner sanctum of ancient manuscripts. Chebeague travelers came home with lots to share. Egypt was just the first of many trips. 10 trips overseas and also 4 in the US. Each trip had a new itinerary based on where everyone wanted to go. We sailed to the Greek islands, swam in the Red Sea. We visited the Greco-Roman world around the Aegean Sea. We listened to a Turkish choir practice American spirituals as well as Georgian and Mevlevi chants in the music loft of Hagia Sophia in Istanbul. At home, we went to see how museums displayed the treasures we saw on our trips. Dumbarton Oaks and the Textile Museum in Washington, D.C., the Metropolitan Museum and Museum of Natural History in New York City, the Walters Gallery in Baltimore, the Boston Museum of Fine Arts. Over 200 people participated directly in these trips from 1999 to 2011. Some went on multiple trips. Chebeaguers kept up the fun spirit and fundraising, building festive floats at home for the 4th of July parade. Joni commented, "We didn't just stay at home and knit. Instead, the community enthusiasm and ideas helped create a modern museum for exhibits, educational programs, and archival storage." In 2003, everyone gathered to celebrate this achievement. The Museum of Chebeague History now contains memories of these trips in its archives, donated by the travelers and their families. Thanks to the efforts of Chip Emery, you can view them online or in the archives. May they inspire you for the future. Museums are the trophies of peace. They help us to think big, stay curious, and make our own fun together.
Thank you, Surreal. That was really I only have one PS. I don't have a big story to tell, but I have a success story that will beat almost everybody's. My success story was I was a teacher for 40 years. That's a pretty good success story, but in that time, I taught writing. And toward the last of it, I thought I always wanted to be a professor, never got to be. So I pulled our little podium thing to the desk and I looked at the kids and I said, I've always wanted to be a professor. Today's it, I'm gonna be the professor. So they're all looking and I said, I'm going to teach you metaphors, which is not, that's a tricky thing for even adults to do metaphors. So I pulled the podium over and I looked, and what was a metaphor in there? It was a book. I grabbed a book off the shelf. I had tons of English books. And it had pimple in it. I thought, I'm not doing that with teenagers. I'm not doing that. So I looked down at the book, and this is my other problem. It was the only time I ever swore in my 40 years. By mistake, I said, oh, shit. The room grew deathly silent. And I said, well, I need to explain. I'm sorry, but I need to explain as I lost my train of thought. And the biggest kid in the classroom got up and he said, not to worry because here it comes. And the train went right by the school. Oh. So I figure I taught a lot of people metaphors. They never forgot that one. And that is the most well-known metaphor in the whole English language. So thank you very much for coming. And my last failure was, and I'll have to fix this, is I thought I was very clever making up another thing for this deal, is it's all prologue until it isn't. I thought that's a real upbeat thing. It's all prologue till it isn't. Well, you know what they thought. I said, well, you know, what do you think it is when it isn't? And they said, when you die. That was not it. I had a whole thing. So thank you very much.